In the modern age, male characterization on screen has narrowed into several categories. The two-dimensional, muscle-bound colossus who is such a force of nature he doesn't really need too much of a personality. The intense, slender, second-guessing nice guy archetype. The stern, well-groomed institutional figure. The sullen, emo-ish loner. The hard-bitten elderly patriarch. And the conspicuously aging legacy character. At the same time, for many who don't have a great fondness for classic cinema, male characterization from the past has taken on a kind of quaintness, is often seen as wooden, stilted, the performances having a kind of contrived staunchness. This is a shame, because modern Hollywood is bereft of compelling male characters, either because the culture has changed and there is less of an emphasis on the modern leading man, or there are many screenwriters who have an impulse to deconstruct that idea of a traditional leading man, or a disinterest in setting films in places where men are likely to thrive and take the lead, frontiers, conflicts, working-class laboring contexts. Or, what I think is most likely, these screenwriters don't really understand and don't know how to depict masculine identity, masculine traits, masculine social dynamics, masculine psychology, humor, virility, tensions, and ways of apprehending the world. Shit, I'm not even sure modern screenwriters know how men actually talk.
The ship has a secret. For unlike the stone, her gaze is not downward but up.
Shut the fuck up. Now, I'm not especially into simple binaries of alpha male and beta male, but it is worth examining the idea that males tend to form into hierarchies, in school, on the sports field, in the pursuit of females, in climbing the corporate ladder, and in social situations. Just as with a woman, if she is upset or disappointed with you, or there are some simmering cross-purposes, just by walking into the room where she is sitting you can feel in the air, or by body language, or subtly lengthened sighs, that you're in trouble. There are equivalents in maledom. If there is a rough and slightly rowdy pub and you enter, you will feel and have to assert yourself against the scrutiny of those within. If you're starting your first day on a labor site, you will be subjected to the same scrutiny, whether there are any pretensions, inauthenticity, affectations, or fragility. All of this is done without men being all that demonstrative. Men have always ideally comported themselves in an undemonstrative way. They draw attention and even speculation to themselves through presence, subdued confidence that makes them the social center of gravity. Unfortunately, in the modern age of Hollywood screenwriting, infused with several decades of clumsily conflating male inexpressiveness with emotional immaturity, these male dynamics have faded a huge deal, and you have a whole bunch of characters who are a whole bunch of things dudes dislike and find tedious in other guys. Overly earnest, or full of too much energy, or overly self-deprecating, or anally fretful. The great male actors of yesteryear understood the deep registers of irony in interactions, especially with other men. Oftentimes, they were more silent than speaking. They cleaved to the rule in acting training that a great deal of acting isn't delivering your line, but how you react to the last line that was just delivered to you. They would stare into a middle distance of ironic contemplation, and continue to size up who they were talking to at the same time as deliberating on their answers. And below the dialogue there would be pushes and pulls, subtle concessions and dismissals. These male dynamics relied on something modern Hollywood doesn't have much allowance for nowadays: time. In male psychology, especially between potential rivals or protagonists and antagonists, dominance and assertion has a lot to do with who is controlling the pace and rhythm of an exchange. Just like in boxing, where one competitor might flail against the other who is absorbing it by leaning back into the ropes, the more one guy becomes overly expressive, the pace increases, the more he appeals to reason, the more he can find himself in a passive position, wilting under the quiet, ironical assessment of the other. These kind of dynamics take time and intuition to develop and get across, and they also take actors who inherently understand this kind of stuff, usually because they've grown up with it. But modern filmmaking has accelerated to such an extent that it is all about hustling from one scene or action set piece to the next, of films overly crowded with characters, so there's little room or time for any dynamics at all, or the male characters are shunted into delivering one-sided lecturing monologues.
You've got to do better, Senator. You've got to step up.
Shut the fuck up. These ironies of masculine scrutiny aren't always about dominance. They can speak to deep tensions and divisions between fathers and sons, of expectations unmet, of conflict between one generation's rigid perseverance and the younger's disaffected, prodigal selfishness. And it can also allude to and express deep trauma, regret, which again, modern society and script writing usually conveys as buttoned-up emotional immaturity and self-scarring, but often has to do with more complex notions, such as subduing and mastering grief and trauma because the man has to hold himself together in the face of otherwise overwhelming pressures and odds. Or the past trauma is profound and not easily understood or reconciled, that it has its own way of saying when it is time for it to be reckoned with, which may take decades. Sometimes a burden isn't merely born, it becomes an integral, irrefutable part of your identity. Hence the silence of war veterans, a silence largely respected by the wider population. As hard as it may seem for modern screenwriters, you can go too much the other way, that dwelling upon, discussing, processing and holding forth about trauma and burdens can actually be kind of banal and tedious. Lastly, this kind of masculine characterization isn't necessarily about the patriarchy or traditional masculine roles. Many classic films feature characters drifting about while bigger forces are turning about them, and there is a strange pathos about their lack of agency, lack of purpose in the scheme of things. They're almost droll, languishing, with a very male kind of fatalism. It's great that women are gaining parity in on-screen roles, and I think it's safe to say that this year has seen the greatest amount of female leads in ensembles ever. But there shouldn't be a contrasting reduction in the scope and nuance of male characterization and masculinity itself on screen. Because film is about reflecting society, and if modern cinema isn't doing that in a way that is proportionate and realistic, then cinema and society are the worse for it.